Hey everybody, what's up? It's Not a Newbie, back again with yet another video, and today we're going to be talking about the new MCU movie, Thunderbolts, which I had a blast with, honestly. Now, let me set the stage for you with this one, because the Thunderbolts is, I think, the final movie inside of the multiverse saga, and I've been refusing to call this the multiverse saga because many of the shows and movies inside of the multiverse saga have just felt too disconnected for my liking. Like, sure, technically they all work together, but that's only because when you're messing with time travel, by default, it does end up retconning things that have happened in the past. So it makes it hard to be invested in any TVA plotline because that plotline might end up getting retconned later. But the one consistency of this multiverse saga has been the build-up and creation of the Thunderbolts. As soon as this movie got announced, I was excited because of how good of a job they've been doing in building up the team. If you're not familiar with this, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine has been running around recruiting all these people and saying, hey, work for me. It's something very clear, very consistent in the other works in the MCU. So when this movie came out, it made perfect sense that all these people would be working together. Good consistency. It really reminded me of earlier phases in the MCU with the collection of the Infinity Stones. It made a whole lot of sense because we knew that Thanos was going around collecting these Infinity Stones. People were fighting over these Infinity Stones. It made sense, even if altogether all those sequences only added up to a few minutes per film. Here, we had something very similar with post-credit scenes of Valentina recruiting people, really adding up to the creation of this team. It really worked for me. Despite all of the trailers, the early reviews, and my own expectations, I still ended up being surprised by how much I liked this movie. Now, I'm still not 100% sure when I'm going to end up rating this movie. Right now, I have it at 8 out of 10. When I got out of the theater, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I will say that people have been complaining about the humor, for example, it being too much and things. I disagree with that because there were some jokey points in especially the second act of the film, but I think that they weren't used to overshadow more serious moments in the vast majority of cases. And yes, the jokes are still sort of like Marvel-y jokes. It's still Marvel humor. That doesn't necessarily make the style of humor bad. It just makes it a little bit repetitive when we have 20 or 30 some odd Marvel movies at this point that all have the same humor. It's repetitive, but it doesn't mean that it's bad necessarily. I will say that the directing from Jake Schreier was fantastic. Visually, everything was really good. Really good. I don't know if I would say incredible for all the stuff. I know some of the stuff was very cool, like all the stuff they did with the void, turning everyone into shadows, all that stuff, but we didn't see any crazy cinematography. And there were some really nice things, like, I'm not really a foot guy, but it's still kind of a cool sequence. The shots of Bob's foot floating into the air, that was really cool. But generally, what I liked best about the directing of this film was the use of color. There were scenes that were very dark, kind of felt like what you would see from like a modern TV show, but sort of in a good way, where, you know, a lot of times we've got very dark scenes and very dark areas with plenty of shadows. Now, everything's not all washed out like it was in the first Avengers movie. Like, if you go watch the first Avengers movie, you see how bright and contrasty everything is. Inside of Thunderbolts, it's completely different. But I think it really works because it makes everything feel really natural. So, for example, when the characters are crawling on the ground in the desert, everything is bright. There's some contrast there because they're out in the bright hot sun. Even when they're outside a little bit, we see some color, but it's overcast, so of course it's going to be a little bit dark. Like, I think they used color in a way they didn't feel like they were forcing the darkness onto the film, but it was just there naturally. And I guess that sort of does get to the themes of the film as well, is focusing on the topic of depression and loneliness. I was very surprised by how they handled this and the fact that they even fully committed to those two topics, because I assumed it would sort of just be aesthetic window dressing for the film, kind of giving it a darker, grittier feel without actually having to commit to it and even making the audience think. We sort of saw Zack Snyder do something very similar. If you've ever watched his Snyderverse films, there is a dark aesthetic, and it's supposed to give you this feeling that this movie's gritty and dramatic and dark, but actually those movies aren't necessarily dark when you compare them to other superhero films. because it doesn't really tackle themes that are all of that dark or deep. However, Thunderbolts does do this with some tact. For that, I do give it some credit. Its messaging is a little bit on the nose, but I think it also does a bit of show, don't tell as well, especially earlier on in the film. It sort of shows you its point before it actually tells you, which was actually very nice because, you know, you've got some people who sort of have trouble interpreting certain messaging in media, and then you've got others who very much are into media literacy and all of that. So they provided enough for people in both camps to be satisfied with what they got out of this movie. I will say this movie also had great team dynamics as well. One thing I kind of liked about this movie and the team here is that, unlike in the Avengers, the differences in bickering between the members sort of centered around personality rather than values. For example, Walker, who was US agent at this point, is extremely arrogant, and so that grates up against the other characters as they are sort of put off by how much he's trying to take control and take charge of everything. Also, the Red Guardian sort of has conflict with the other characters because of how jokey he is. The other people find that somewhat annoying. So it's kind of nice to see the interplay here. It feels very natural. But another thing is, these conflicts don't center on values, which is a lot of what we got in the first Avengers movie. As a matter of fact, many of those differences led to the Avengers splitting up. If you've ever seen Captain America Civil War, yeah, they ended up splitting up because of the ideological differences between Iron Man and Captain America. We don't really see that here, so this could be a more permanent and more stable team than the Avengers ended up being originally. Also, I will say that the action sequences were pretty good, although this movie certainly could have used a little bit more hand-to-hand fighting with goons considering the skill set of these characters. But I will say that the drama sequences sort of worked, and I don't really feel bad that it sort of carried this movie for most of the runtime. Also, I must say, going deeper to spoiler territory here, I'm quite happy that they ended up killing Taskmaster in this movie, because Taskmaster in the MCU has been quite lame. Like, sure, maybe she had one kind of neat fight sequence in Black Widow, but generally she was pretty nerfed, and she wasn't really like the Taskmaster that we all know and love from the comics or other iterations of Taskmaster. The version of Taskmaster that I'm most familiar with is the one from the cartoon Ultimate Spider-Man, where he's basically portrayed as a character who's unbeatable, more or less, because of his ability to imitate the fighting style of anyone that he's fighting in real time. As a matter of fact, I think it takes Deadpool to defeat Taskmaster in Ultimate Spider-Man. You know that they're desperate when they're putting Deadpool in Ultimate Spider-Man to defeat the Taskmaster. So I'm really happy about that. I know a lot of people were upset, but honestly, I'm mostly upset that there's blood in the suit now. I'm looking forward to getting a real Taskmaster in the MCU at some point in the future. But last but not least, I think that we should talk about the second credit scene, because the second credit scene was very interesting. The one thing is, I think it's a little bit of a plot hole or a goof. Like, I'm not sure why the US agent would not have fixed his shield after 14 months of being in the new Avengers, as the Thunderbolt team ends up being called by Valentina. But I think it was a great scene, and one thing I really liked about it was that you could very clearly tell that it was directed by someone else, and Jake Schreier actually ended up confirming this. He said it was shot by a different director and on the set of Avengers Doomsday. To me, that indicates that it very likely could be a sequence that shows up in Avengers Doomsday, which, if that's the case, I think that'd be really, really cool. There's also a chance that it might show up inside of the Fantastic Four First Steps. That would also be really nice. But in any case, this sort of heightens my excitement and expectations for the First Steps as well, because now we're getting a lot more cohesion, right? We've got the Fantastic Four showing up inside of Thunderbolts. So that sort of is a natural way to move forward into the next movie. And then also, after Thunderbolts, presumably we're going to see something regarding Doctor Doom, and then that leads directly into Avengers Doomsday. Really looking forward to all of that stuff. But generally, I must say, great movie. I like the writing. There are minimal plot holes except for that one with US Agent's shield. This was an overall very enjoyable movie, very entertaining movie. I think if I wanted anything out of a Thunderbolts movie, this movie sort of covered all of that and more. I just wish that maybe there was a little bit more hand-to-hand fighting, and I do wish that Walker got a new shield, because man, that thing was in bad shape by the end of that movie. So That's pretty much all I have to say about this movie. But if you guys have any thoughts about this movie, please let me know in the comments down below. And I guess I'll see you guys in another video if you want to see another one of my videos.